Stop right here. Inside the palace, two men who must speak every day have fallen quiet, and if you think that's routine, you're not paying attention. We're talking about a silence so thick it changes schedules, bends narratives, and makes every hallway whisper sound like thunder. What flipped the switch wasn't a scandal, not a leak, not a late-night crisis. It was a single, carefully worded television conversation that landed like a pebble and rippled like an earthquake. Here's the shape of it, without the varnish. One side hears modernize, the other side hears criticize. One side says change for good, the other side hears change from you. And in between those two translations sits the crown, an institution that only works when the sovereign and the heir march in lockstep, especially when the cameras aren't looking. Now, watch the sequence. The heir sits down on a glossy global platform and speaks in the language younger audiences actually understand, less choreography, more impact, fewer rituals for ritual's sake, better armor around the children so the next generation doesn't inherit bruises disguised as tradition. He never names names. He never points fingers. He doesn't have to. The message is clean, modern, and impossible to mishear. The next chapter won't look exactly like the last. And that's where the temperature in the room changes. Because if you're the reigning monarch, you've spent your opening act lowering the drama, tightening the screws, carrying a beloved legacy without wobble. You're the custodian, the ballast, the careful hand on the tiller. Then your son talks about practices of the past, vows not to go back, and floats the phrase that makes courtiers sit up straight. Change is on my agenda. Not revolution. Not rupture. But change. In a family firm built on continuity, that single word can feel like a match near the curtains. What happens next isn't fireworks, it's hush. Not the calm, but the pause. The usual back and forth between the top two offices thins out. Routine approvals start to take the scenic route. A sentence that would normally be tweaked quietly becomes a line no one wants to touch. And because invisibility is the palace's superpower, the moment that oxygen drops inside, speculation floods in from outside. Suddenly you're hearing phrases you were never meant to hear. Betrayal versus honesty, not just family, the crown itself. Trust isn't broken, but it isn't bending either. Notice what's missing. A photo. The classic pressure valve, two figures, one path, 10 seconds of smiles. It hasn't happened yet, and the longer it doesn't, the louder the room gets. Here's why this lands so hard. In royal politics, tone is policy. The heir didn't announce a manifesto, he demonstrated a method. Less balcony, more throughput. Patronages that can pull receipts. Fewer glossy poses, more projects that move needles. And yes, a soft red line drawn around his own children, protection as policy, not apology. Whether you love or loathe monarchy, that framing hits a nerve. What's the point of all this if the outcomes aren't measurable, humane, and current? But there's the other nerve. The king's entire brand is steadiness. After shocks, scandals, and health storms, he has sold one product relentlessly: stability. You do not keep a ship upright by yanking the wheel in public. You change course quietly, on paper, in meetings, then you let the cameras discover it later. That's the monarch's instinct. And yes, to that instinct, the heir's public sketches can feel like momentum you didn't authorize at a time you least want surprises. Now zoom out. This isn't just about two sentences on a streaming platform. It's about the architecture of the next decade. The monarchy is juggling reduced headcount, heavier workloads, and a scrutiny economy that never sleeps. Every choice gets priced in by the public in minutes, not months. Younger Brits and a global audience want less fairy tale, more function. They will tolerate ceremony, but only if the ceremony shields something they love: children's privacy, cleaner air, saner media pressure, visible service. The heir is triangulating to that reality on air. The sovereign is guarding the glide path off air. Those are not opposing instincts, they're complementary until pride gets involved. So here's the playbook being whispered. Option 1, the classic peace walk. It calms markets, resets headlines, and buys time. But it's a plaster, not a surgery. If the real issue is pace, not purpose, the photo lowers the fever and leaves the infection. Option 2, managed distance. Fewer overlaps, careful calendars, polite frost. It reads fine on paper and terrible on camera. The public smells chill faster than staffers expect. Option 3, the grown-up fix. Private summit, real ground rules, a handshake on language and tempo. Reform framed as continuity's bodyguard. Continuity credited as reform's safety net. That one works because the cameras will eventually see it in the work. Let's put the unsaid on the table. When the heir says he won't drag his children through the same grinder he and his brother grew up in, he isn't indicting a specific person. He's indicting a system. The audience hears it, nods, and files it under basic humanity. The crown does not lose mystique by gaining mercy. If anything, mercy is the only way it keeps mystique in a century trained to punish distance and reward candor. That's the paradox the monarchy has to master: stay sacred, but show receipts. And yes, the interview contained more than family lines, it contained governing lines. Not overly radical. That's a crucial qualifier. Translation: we keep the spine, service, continuity, dignity, and we trim what can't defend itself in a paragraph. That's not iconoclasm. That's austerity with a brain. It also answers the biggest charge against modern monarchy: cost vs value. If every appearance buys something tangible, funding unlocked, policy nudged, communities lifted, then the institution earns a new license to operate, even among skeptics. That's the heir's pitch, stripped to the bone. So why the static? Timing. The family is exiting a year of shocks. Recoveries are real but fragile. The York orbit keeps throwing off headlines nobody asked for. The Sussex weather front drifts in and out of the forecast. In that climate, a forward-leaning monologue from the heir, however thoughtful, is going to electrify the air. The sovereign hears thunder where the heir hears applause. And the silence after is simply everyone counting to 10 and then to 20. Here's the temperature check you won't see on an official bulletin. If the next joint outing is a low-key visit with high-utility veterans, disaster resilience, early childhood, environmental resilience, paired with language like shared priorities and building on Her Late Majesty's legacy, you'll know the summit happened and the grown-ups won. If instead you get a hasty sidewalk smile with nothing meaningful attached, you're looking at optics, not alignment. It will work for 48 hours and then the room will go loud again. There's also a simple political truth. Saying change isn't enough. The audience will demand nouns. Which practices won't return? What does results per appearance look like as a scoreboard? How do you add transparency without burning the last threads of mystique? Where do children's boundaries get codified, not improvised? If the heir continues this conversation, he'll have to speak in specifics. If the king blesses those specifics, he'll be credited for statesmanship, the monarch who supervised evolution without surrender. One warning shot to both teams: do not underestimate silence. Inside the palace, silence is either Sabbath or standoff. Outside, it is a megaphone. The longer it lingers, the more oxygen it gives to people whose business model is turning a bruise into a break. The institution does not survive on drama, it survives on delivery. Calibrate accordingly. And if you're still wondering whether this is a rupture or a rehearsal, watch the choreography, not the captions. Do diaries start dovetailing? Do speeches begin echoing each other's phrases? Do briefings from Kensington and Buckingham suddenly use the same 3 nouns to describe the same priority? That's how you spot a plan stitched in private. The photograph will just be the souvenir. So no, this is not a gossip puff. This is the tightrope. On one end, relevance in a century that won't wait. On the other, the ancient promise that the crown doesn't flinch. The heir just told you how he plans to cross. The sovereign will now decide how wide the net sits underneath. And the rest of us will know the second the silence breaks by what they do, not by what they say.